بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Dear respected viewers, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to your show of Spiritual Conversations. It delights me to be here to serve you all again today, and alhamdulillah with our respected guest, Sheikh Jaffer. Sheikhna, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you, brother Hussein?
Allah alaikum. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well, Sheikhna. Thank you so much. Sheikhna, so tonight's topic is one that's always in our minds and something that we are asking very often. How do I prepare for the return of the Imam of my time, Ajalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif? And I believe this month is especially the month to ask that question. So, Sheikhna, please delight us with some of those advice.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين. The topic itself is, you're right, absolutely important, right? And especially when we, for example, read the ad'iyas and the supplications in the month of Ramadan, especially dua iftitah, there's a major component within that dua where we address our concerns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about the Imam not being here. We say to Allah, Allahumma inna nashku ilayka faqda nabiyina wa ghaybata waliyina. And this is something that we are being taught to do. The importance of praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the Imam of our time. But like prayer, this is something that it's got me thinking to that extent where we've been praying for the return of the Imam for like close to 1200 years now. You wonder why that dua is just being kind of not being answered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously there's wisdom behind it. But I think a lot of that, but I think sometimes the du'as that we make may lack the necessary requirements for those du'as to be effective, and that's kind of what I want to talk about from the perspective of what our responsibilities are to our Imam. Like, how do we make it such that when I say to Allah, Ya Allah, I really miss my Imam, man, that's authentic. That Ya Allah, that I'm really need my Imam, that's authentic. And so it's the importance of developing these background or overarching principles in our lives that demonstrate preparation, that we'll talk about first, and then maybe some really practical everyday things that we can do in our lives that will inshallah enhance our connection to the Imam of our time. So the first point I think is really important is we have to, this is distracting, we have to Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, we have to number one, firmly believe in the presence of the Imam. You know what I mean? Like in that the Imam is alive and that the Imam is there. This is not simply like stories we've heard. Because since the time we've been children, right? We've been told, we've been taught that the Imam alayhi salam is there. He's in ghaiba. And so we've accepted it. You know what I mean? And it's very similar to our acceptance of God, that there's a God and we accept it. But there has to come a time in our own personal lives where it's not merely the knowledge that God exists, but it's the concrete establishment that his existence is absolute. Like it's basically proof. Like I get proofs now. Like there's higher levels of faith and higher levels of conviction. You know what I mean? Maybe when we were young, it'd be enough that our mothers and fathers and the Maulanas told us there is a God, right? but then we come to a time where we question it. Similarly with the Imam, like we've been told, that the Imam exists. But how many of us have gone and at least established it to the best of the ability that we can? That yes, there exists, and this is how I would prove it. So I think certain things, for example, and I think this is important for today, saying like, because there's a lot of noise out there from different groups that would like to create this idea that our belief in the imamate of the 12th Imam is not accurate, it's not true, and if this was noise that was coming from non-Shia groups, you'd be like, you know what, like, lakum dinukum waliya din. You practice how you want to, I'll practice how I want to, right? But sadly, these are people who claim to be Shia, right? And who have these ideas that they are promoting. The fact is, like, yes, the traditions regarding the birth of the Imam are not to that extent where, like the traditions of Ghadir, like where there's absolutely no doubt. But what you find when it comes to our 12th Imam is that there are so many examples of so many different situations that when you put them all together, you're left with absolute conviction, right? So like you may have some examples of the birth and what happened during that process at that night of the 11th Imam, and how he was under house arrest, and yet no one knew his wife was pregnant, and yet she delivered, and the story of Sayyidah Hakima al-Khatun, so like we have all of these stories. We have a couple of them that are there, and then we have stories of companions who would ask the 11th Imam, who will be the Imam after you, and he would show them. Like very few people were given that opportunity to have the Imam seen, right? And then he would say then that you won't see him after this. And then you have after that letters that the Imam wrote. I mean, if all of these were fabrications, like that's a lot of fabricating, you know what I mean? Like but when you put all of these things together, it gives you this conviction that, yeah, okay, the Imam exists and this is important, right? Like I was trying to think of an example, like let's say I hear about this really amazing supermarket that exists like in another town, right? Now, or in another country or whatever. And it's like a mythical supermarket because people say like they have like these amazing products and things like that. And I met a guy who says that when he was 3, his dad took him to that supermarket, right? And so I was like, okay, maybe, like maybe that happened. And then, but one day I see a flyer from that supermarket. The next day I see a wrapper that came from that Now, I've never seen that supermarket. But now that I have all of these pieces, I'm quite confident this supermarket exists, right? And I think that's really important when it comes to our 12th Imam. Like we have to have that level. Like, so we all believe he comes because we all make these du'as for him. But it has to go to that level now where
we have like this 100% certainty.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 100% certainty 100% certainty makes sense too, right? Like in the sense, the way we need to have 100% certainty that God exists. Yeah, we have to have 100% certainty that the Imam exists, because otherwise who am I praying for? You know what I mean? Like, what am I preparing for if I don't have that? So yeah, you're absolutely right. And so that's the first preparation we have. And sadly, we're not a reading community, right? Like we're not a reading people. Like we'll watch a 30-second Instagram feed. You know what I mean? We'll watch, like these shorts on YouTube and things like that. But it's to, like even like we have to find this is maybe another topic for another day, but we have to find a way that's going to be effective, because I don't know if Instagram is, because it creates a culture that is also problematic. You know what I mean? And I'm always amazed at, different scholars or different people who preach on Instagram and the fame that comes with it, and how they're able to maintain that
genuinity,
that humility. Exactly, right? Like it's tough, man. It's tough. So congratulations to them for doing it. You know what I mean? But I would struggle with it, So, but that's a different topic, like I said. So that's number one, Hussein, right? Like we need to have this firm belief that the Imam exists, and the proofs are out there. Go study them, go read them. And again, when we try to go seek out these proofs, we're not seeking them out to debate with people. Like I'm not a believer in debates like that. Like if I believe what I believe and you think what I believe is wrong, let's just meet God and let God decide. Like I'm comfortable with that. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to try to tell me I'm wrong. I don't have to convince you. No, let's just do what we believe to be true. You don't have to try and prove it wrong, right? So the proofs are for our own sake. You know what I mean? Like our own understanding. Like I've always said this, that especially this is true for God, you know, in the belief of God, or even the 12th Imam. Like sometimes at night, like when, you know, when you struggle sleeping, like these weird thoughts come into your head, and these are just the whisperings of shaitan, you know. And so shaitan comes and talks to me often at night, you know, and he'd be like, what if all of this is a lie? Right? And boom, like, you know, that's when the mind starts racing. You're like, oh, is it? Could it be? What if there is no God? What if there is no 12th Imam? What if you're just waking up to pray for no reason? What if you're fasting for no reason? Um, you can't allow those type of thoughts to come into your head and not counter them. You know what I mean? Because then those thoughts are like birds that will just float around, and when you least expect it, you'll feel it, like, you know, fly from branch to branch in your mind, right? So you have to be able to cage that thought, and you, like you would cage a bird. And so the way you do that is through intellectual reasoning. You know what I mean? Like shaitan can't win an intellectual battle against us if we are intellectually prepared, right? Because the intellect is a gift from God, and God will always win. But we have to have that necessary tools to be able to do that. And so it's for our own benefit and our own mental state of preparation that we would, number one, get this information and this knowledge.
Shaykhna, so on establishing basically the Imam's existence and his life until now, are there certain resources or sources that you may refer the viewers to of how to or where to access that those evidences, those proofs from the narrations of the Prophet up until the story itself?
Yeah, there's a really good website, you know. Um, Maybe like towards the end, I just have to access it, and if I do it right now, it's gonna be like quiet for a little while.
Yeah, no,
But I just have to access it, and I will mention. I think it's called Islamic. It's basically a collection. It's an amazing collection of Islamic resources, and there's a whole section on the 12th Imam that's really well put together, I gotta say, right? Like it's more English collections than I've seen in other places. But maybe in the end, when you're wrapping it up, I'll quickly try to pull that up,
inshallah.
and I will provide that. But yeah, it's a really good question, because yeah, we got to tell them where to go get it from, right? So you're
Yeah.
absolutely correct. Thank you for that.
Hmm.
So that's number one, you know. So the second aspect of an overarching principle of preparation is the developing of a need for the imam, right? And this is really important, okay? Because, like, you know, when we make dua for something, when that dua is um, is coupled with a desperation, that dua is more sincere. You know what I mean? It's more urgent. It's more I need it now. Like if I have like a broken leg, fire, something. But if the need is not there, then that dua becomes kind of casual. Like, Ya Allah, I need the Imam. Right? Like, but if I feel a need, my dua will be very much different. And an important question that, you know, we have to ask ourselves is um, do we need the Imam in our lives? You know, and so obviously when we ask that question, like if I ask that question to you, saying, you would say, yes, of course we need the Imam, because none of us want to be that person who says like, no, I don't need the Imam in my life, right? Um, but but then we got to ask ourselves a secondary question, right? And say that, where is that need in my life? What is missing in my life that can only be filled with his return? And that's a scary question, man. That's a really scary question, because a need, by definition, is something that we cannot live without. You know, oxygen is a need, right? Um, Do we feel suffocated that the Imam is not with us? Food is a need. Are we starved that the Imam is not with us? You know, water is a need, clothing is a need. Um, and do I have that same feeling for the Imam that, man, something is missing desperately in my life and I need him back, you know? Um, and it's a tough question. You know why? Because life is good. Life is real good. You know what I mean? Especially, obviously, we can't blanketly speak that for everyone in the world, but a lot of us living here in the West, like we have developed, you know, this is like an old, like an old question, like $1 million question, and who is it harder for? People who live in impoverished nations or people who live in like affluent nations, you know? I think it's important that we don't judge other people's tests. You know what I mean? Like just worry
Yeah,
about your own
yeah.
test. But at the same time, um, our test here is is also quite critical. You know what I mean? Because we have created, in a way, paradise on earth. Um, and because of this paradise, like my desire for that paradise that God has talked about is not that intense. You know what I mean? Like what? Like I know this sounds funny, but like what else honestly could God provide that I can't get right now in Amazon? You know what I mean? Or like I can't get delivered. Like you know, like like obviously like I understand, we understand that that's a deeper, more intense, and more than the eyes can see and the ears, but fine, we accept that. But we're also a very materialistic people in the sense that
True.
we understand that which is in front of us, you know. um and so God talks about, like, if you want food, like you think of something and the food will come. I have Uber Eats now, you know. I can get Uber Eats in my house like in 30 minutes and I'll have this food delivered. And so what's happened is that because I have created this paradise on earth, my desire for that paradise has decreased, and therefore that which will I need to be successful there, I don't feel it as an absolute need anymore. You know what I mean? I'm
And I
okay. My
won't
life is
work for
okay.
it.
What's that?
And I won't work for it. I won't work for that
Yeah,
paradise or for that future.
exactly. Like we become complacent, we become lazy, and then like the, you know, and this is then where we end up looking in different places for inspiration. So we'll turn to Instagram for inspiration. We'll turn, and I give that example of Instagram because like I've had a bunch of people tell me like, oh, they're looking for spirituality. So I was like, where are you turning? And they're like, Instagram. I was like, seriously? Like that's where you're turning? And maybe it's there. I'm not on it. Maybe it's there in different ways. I don't know, you know? But man, the Ahlulbayt's teachings are how we connect, you know. It's the Imams that we connect. And so it's literally it's a personal drive, it's a personal goal. And you know what? I'm not knocking IG. If IG works for you, alhamdulillah, you know what I mean? Um, but the need for our Imam would be where? What if Imam comes and like cancels certain things that I rely on in my comfort? Like, would I be happy with his return? You know what I mean? Like, I'm set in my ways. I have paradise on earth. Like, what more value will the Imam add in my life? Is basically what we're saying. And so until we can figure that out, the need is not going to be there, right? And so we have to figure out a more fundamental question or a more fundamental answer to this, and that is like, how do we develop this need? And so, you know, last week we had talked about this three-pronged approach, you know, of strengthening our relationship with God and then with others and ourselves. I'm going to follow a similar methodology, that when we want to develop need for our Imam, in number one starts with strengthening our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, because the fact is, right, like everything belongs, starts and ends with God, right? And so even our need for our Imam starts with our need for God. Like, how much do we need God in our lives? You know, um, like you know, like you know, like sometimes, like let's say I have a lecture that I have to give, or let's just say like this session here on Ahlulbayt TV, and so I'll say to God, like, God, I really need you for this, right? Like I need you. And then, God's great. God will say right back to me, he's like, Jaffer, you don't need me to breathe. You don't need me to walk. You don't need me to blink. You don't need me to type. You don't need me to speak. And I was like, SubhanAllah, God is great, because God reminds us that we need God desperately at all times, at all times. But the problem is we've kind of separated when the need of God is there. So when it matters to me, I need him. Other times I take him for granted.
Or
Um,
perhaps we think we can handle these things alone. We don't need somebody's help. But for those big things, we're like, okay, now I need God's help.
yeah,
In
yeah, you're
reality,
right. Like,
it's even these small things of taking that one step or breathing or, everything. We need God in it.
absolutely, right? Like it's a bit of um like we've taken him for granted. You know what I mean? Just the way like I'm just preparing a series of lectures for the nights of Qadr, and like it's like how Imam Ali talks about the Quran and how we've taken the Quran for granted, like in the sense that it just sits there, and like I pick it up and like it's no big deal, like I pick it up, I go through the pages, I read a page, I put it down. Um, when these are the words of God, man, you know what I mean? Like these are like there's no equivalent. It's gold, it's platinum, it's whatever. It's something so valuable, something so great that not only can it give me dunyawi success, but it can give me absolute ukhrawi success. Then I should have absolute reverence every time I pick up the Quran. Absolute reverence. Like I'm holding, like my hands should shake because there's something so valuable that I have, right? And similarly, we've taken God for granted. You know what I mean? Like it's not something that we've done. And so if I begin to develop a need for God, um, I would subsequently develop this connection with God, which would then rely on his absolute wisdom to govern over my life and to govern over everything, and that everything that God does requires wisdom. Now, if I believe in the wisdom of God that governs everything, divine wisdom necessitates that Allah has to provide somebody who will show me what he wants along with the Quran, right? Um, because it's one thing to have the Quran and to say, okay, this is what it is. But then today we have so many sects getting their interpretations. How do we find out exactly what God wanted? Um, and this is where, divine, the idea of nubuwa, prophethood, that there has to be someone present at all times to make sure that this guidance is taught to us. And this doesn't end with prophethood. It ends with after the prophet, because even after the prophet, there is civilizations, nations that have come. And how do we get our guidance, right? There's a really nice hadith that a person by the name of Ishaq bin Sa'id al-Ash'ari, he comes to our 11th Imam alayhi salam, and so Ishaq is basically telling us that I wanted to ask him about who will be the Imam after him, right? And he said, before I could even ask, the Imam spoke. This is like really cool when these type of things happen, because they could just read your mind. Um, I want that. I want that. I want the ability to just have something in my heart and go to the Imam, and the Imam know what's in my heart, and to save me the trouble and the embarrassment of asking, this answer. Oh man, that'd be so cool. Um,
That's one of those things to look forward to in his return, inshallah.
yeah, man, there are so many things, like if you look at all of the companions of the past and how fortunate they were that like when they had a difficulty, they knew that there was a door they could always knock on. And we don't have that. This is why we recite in Dua Iftitah, right? That we are complaining to you, O Allah. Yeah, that we don't have the Imam. Like this is a big thing that we don't have. And this is where it adds on to our responsibility as well, that until the sahib, the owner of that house returns, we have to have such houses where anyone can feel welcome to come and knock on, and that we take on that responsibility. So the Imam says to him that, Ya Ahmad bin Ishaq, إن الله تبارك وتعالى لم يخلي الأرض منذ خلق آدم ولا يخليها إلى أن تقوم الساعة من حجة الله على خلقه. He says that from the time of Adam till the end of time, Allah would never leave this earth without a proof, yeah, without someone to guide His creation to Him. And through that person, bihi yadfa'ul bala, and through that person, the calamities are averted. Yeah, an ahlil ard, wa bihi yunazzilul ghayth, and it is through that hujjah that the barakat of Allah are showered upon this earth. وَبِهِ يُخْرِجُ بَرَكَاتِ الْأَرْضِ, and through that person, it's bihi is very important, it's through that hujjah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows the blessings and the bounties of this earth to be made available to its people. Like, these are not like, it's like, if, again, like I said, like if somebody who is not a Twelver or a Shia doesn't understand this and say, whoa, like, what does that mean? I allow them to live in ignorance, and I allow them to have these doubts, and it doesn't bother me. But like, we should never, ever get it twisted that the position of the Imam is a necessity, because God would never leave this earth without a hujjah being present. And so it is part of this vertical wilaya, this divine order, that everything starts with Allah, but then Allah has set certain things in this order that carry out a cause and effect system, right? And so the positioning of those within this order is a necessity. And if that necessity were to be removed, everything would cease to exist. It doesn't mean that God is not in control, right? Like, you take oxygen, air. Air is a necessity. Through air we survive. So it's not incorrect for me to say air gives me life. Oxygen gives me life. Would that be incorrect? No, nobody would argue that, because we all understand that even though I say oxygen gives me life, we also know that God is the one who provides oxygen. And
Exactly.
so no one calls oxygen my shirky God, you know what I mean? Like to say, oh, you've done shirk with oxygen. No, like, we've understood what was meant. But it's only when we add a human being in that and we say, oh, you're doing shirk. The 12th Imam is a need. He's a necessity. He has to be there. Just like oxygen is a need, it has to be there. And it's God who said it, you know what I mean? But if you remove oxygen, life ceases to exist. You remove the 12th Imam, life ceases to exist. You know what I mean?
It's Allah's system Himself.
Exactly. Allah has created this system, right? And this is why when we recite du'as, for example, like, this point is so eloquently articulated. For example, in Du'a Nudba, we say, Aina babullahi alladhi minhu yu'ta. Where is the door from which everything is given? Who is that door? The 12th Imam is that door. But God has made him that door, right? And so it's a necessity that he exists, right? Aina sababul muttasilu bayna al-ardi was-sama. Where is the cause that is holding the heavens and the earth? So this is not hyperbole. This is not, but it's something that we have to understand, that the 12th Imam, from my relationship with God, would determine this, is an absolute need. Just like air is a need, food is a need, water is a need, hujjah is a need. You know what I mean? And it's without him, my life would not exist. And so if he plays that fundamental of a role in my existence, then I have to crave him. I have to want him. I have to have this need for him, So that is an important point that we always have to keep in our minds. So that's the first point, about our relationship with God to develop a need. The second way of developing that need is through our relationship with his creation. The fact is that people are suffering throughout the world. You know what I mean? And this suffering is not just, so like, obviously, like, we see news reports and like of things that happen in different parts of the world, and like, it should break our hearts. It absolutely should break our hearts. And like it's important that we don't become desensitized to these type of things, you know. And again, like I think when we talk about habits next week, what we'll see is that the soul, yeah, the soul has. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we have a call on the line. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is about Hajj. During the Hajj, a friend of mine, Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is about Hajj.
Okay.
Was not able to complete the Hajj after the Mount Arafah. They went to Muzdalifah. She was sick, very ill, and then she was not able to go to do the Tawaf al-Wida.
The Tawaf al-Nisa?
Not with the Al-Fada, Tawaf al-Fada. What happened?
If you don't mind, you know, I am, to be honest, like I'll have...
After throwing the pebble, she couldn't go back to Mecca to perform the Tawaf al-Wida. Not Wida, Afada.
Right. If you don't mind, sister, you know, like I'll have to honestly like research that particular answers. If you can give your... If you can give your email address to the studio, I will inshallah get back to you with an answer, inshallah.
Thank you, sister.
All right. So, yeah.
People around the world, yes.
Yeah, people are suffering throughout the world, right? And like it should break our hearts. And so I guess, like I said, like when we talk about habits, like next week, inshallah, like what you see is that the human being has this natural disposition of becoming desensitized over time, you know? But it's important we figure out a way not to, because that hurt is a necessary component in wanting the Imam back. You know what I mean? But at the same time, like we have to be very cognizant of the fact that people are hurting not just far away, but even close to home. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times, like we'll and rightly so, donate for causes in different parts of the world. But if you just look at, you know, poverty rates and homelessness rates and lack of food rates in our own neighborhoods, in our own backyards, you know, it's sometimes shocking to say subhanallah, like, you know, like here in Toronto, for example, since this has been every year, but the number of people who need the services of the food banks, the number of people who need services of the shelters and things like that has increasingly been getting larger, to the point where, you know, if I remember correctly, you know, in the city I live in Brampton, the next city is Mississauga. And that probably doesn't mean anything to anyone in different parts of the world, but like there's a large Muslim population in these cities, you know. But in certain food banks and certain homeless shelters, or in certain abuse centers, nearly 60 to 70% of the people who go to that centers are Muslims. And that's a huge number, you know what I mean? Like, and so there are people who are, and even if they weren't Muslims. So the point is that, man, people are suffering. Even though I may be okay, it shouldn't disconnect me from the fact that there are people who are going through emotional problems, spiritual problems, psychological problems, physical problems, financial problems. And sometimes we feel a greater sense of connection to that when we ourselves are suffering, and when we don't, that connection gets fractured. But if we were to get connected, that we don't have to suffer to feel the suffering of others, but we are constantly mindful, then our desire and need for the Imam to come and solve that would become even greater, because that's what our traditions tell us, right? Like the Imam is the one who will bring back justice. The Imam will bring back tolerance. The Imam will bring back um, adl, and like he will bring back the barakat of the earth and all of these things, right? And so if I know that the only remedy to these problems is the Imam's return, then I should want the Imam desperately. You know what I mean? Um, it's not, and this is why, like I say, like we have to make sure that like we're not only like we're not very tunnel visioned where I'm okay, so everyone's okay. The fact is, not everyone's okay. People are suffering. People are going through difficulty, and if I hold the magic key to end the suffering of everyone, then I'm pretty selfish if I don't activate that key. And the key is the 12th Imam. I mean, you know, it opens that door. You know what I mean? And so we have to learn to feel the pain of others. We have to feel the grief of others. We have to feel the hurt of others. And as long as we don't feel this, the urgency of having the Imam return won't be there. So, you know, like certain things you can do or we can do, saying is like go to homeless shelters and serve, right? We can go to soup kitchens and provide meals. We can donate our time to local charities. We can, if for example, there's a charity that's happening in a different part of the world, see if they can accept me as a volunteer, you know? And the more I see with my own eyes and feel with my own body the suffering of others, the more urgent I will feel for the Imam. But when we are not willing to, like if it's really easy to just PayPal somebody $50, you know what I mean? Like even that, okay, it's not easy, but a lot
easier than actually going there and basically seeing the actual necessities, seeing the suffering. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Like it's so much easier. Like we become absolute keyboard warriors. You know what I mean? Like I can do everything superbly well from my keyboard and behind my laptop. And oh, you wanted something done, I got it. But God forbid, like you need my physical presence. You know. And so maybe that's one way, right? Like the next time we see an opportunity to volunteer, and like I've seen that, you know, like there's these missions that people go on from here. They go from London to Iraq to other parts of the country, and they do like eye clinics and dental clinics. And I've seen the people who volunteer for that, and when they come back, they're really more connected with society, like more connected with that grief. And maybe that's something a lot of us need to do, you know, more of us need to do. And give money too. Like we don't stop giving money, but at the same time we can do a lot more so that we can feel that pain. So the first one was developing a need through our relationship with God. The second is developing our need through society and how we can activate that. And the third is developing a need in our relationship with ourselves, you know. I would like to think that we're not bad people. We're not bad believers. I would like to think that none of us sin. Like obviously, like, you know, I'm probably kidding myself, but like I'd like to think that. I mean, I always tell my community and any community that I get a chance to speak to that, man, we've been believers for 40, 50, 60, 70 years. That belief should have some effect on me. You know what I mean? Like I shouldn't sin. Like if I know something is haram, I shouldn't do it, right? Like it's mind-boggling to me. It always is that people will still sin. People will lie. People will cheat. People will listen to music. People, why? Like, where's the belief? You know what I mean? Like, why? Why would we do these things if we know God has said He doesn't like these things or He has forbidden these things, right? And so I'd like to believe that none of us are bad people, right? But at the same time, none of us are perfect. And we're at this place in our lives, at least I can speak for myself, and I'm sure that I speak for a lot of people, that we're at a place in our lives where it feels like we've hit a wall. And so I need help to get through that wall. You know, the problem is that sometimes, and this is really dangerous, is that when we hit that wall, many people will stop and be comfortable leaning against that wall. But they don't realize, they think that they reached the end, you know? So they think, for example, like, I'm a good believer. I'm stopped, I'm good. But the fact is that they don't realize that their job is to break through this wall. And when they do, the closeness to God increases exponentially, you know? The connection with God increases exponentially. And so, yes, we've been told what it will take to get over that wall. Things like secret charity, things like Salatul Layl, things like following the teachings of the Quran and reflecting on them and trying to apply the lessons into our lives every day practically, right? Like change how we approach the Quran. These are some of the things that, you know, like giving adhan and iqamah before our prayers. You know, there are certain things where like it's really cool, you know, like it's really cool where like there are certain things where God boasts about us to his angels. Like, you know, like when we do adhan and iqamah, Allah boasts, he says, look, he's standing to pray. Such a small thing, right? Like it takes like a minute and a half to give adhan and iqamah before we pray. But how come sometimes I just don't feel like doing it? You know what I mean? Like so like we know these things, but I don't have that extra motivation. And this is where like the need for the imams should be felt, because the imams had this special ability. Like when you read, for example, theological books, books on Aqidah, like say Mustafa Lari has this book on God and his attributes. It's a very good intermediary book, you know, in English. But he says that the imams, and we're not talking about the 12 imams, we're talking about the status of imamat, which the Prophet is the greatest example of. Then we have Ibrahim alayhi salam, and we have our imams and stuff, and who are there, that they have not only, what separates them from prophets is that the prophets were given external sharia and external tools. But what the imams have been given is internal tools. And so the imam can look at your heart and know the right thing to say at the right time to have an effect on you. You know what I mean? Subhanallah, like amazing, right? Because, you know, like if you understand that, then it makes sense that, you know, we've heard like so many stories where like some guy would come and insult the imam would say, hey, you look like a stranger, come to my house and eat, and the guy would become a believer. And we listen to that and we'd be like, man, I tried that, it didn't work. You know, the guy beat me up when I tried to offer that, you know, like we didn't work for us. It's because Imam knew that that's what that person needed to hear at that time. That's what that person needed at that moment to grab, right, them. And there are so many stories like that, right? Like the story of this person by the name of Abu Basir. Abu Basir was a man who lived in Kufa, I believe it was, but he had a really bad neighbor, you know, and then this neighbor was a drunkard and he used to have parties all the time. And so, you know, when you have a bad neighbor, it really disturbs you. And so it was bothering this guy, that this guy lived in a Muslim town, had a Muslim family name, etc. Externally was Muslim, but internally had no Islam. And so he said he would speak to his neighbor and say to him, like, till when will you do this? And the guy said, he would say, you know what? It's like, I don't have the ability to change. I just don't, you know, like I'm stuck in my ways. And he's like, I just don't have that himmah, that strength and that courage to change. And so one day this neighbor found out that Abu Basir was going to pilgrimage and that he would stop by Medina. And so he asks him that, are you going to see Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam? And he says, yes. And he says that, ask Imam to pray for me. And that's what he asks. You know, he just says, tell the Imam to pray for me. And so he left. And then when he meets the Imam, Abu Basir, the sixth Imam, you know, he says to him, and what about your neighbor? Again, the Imams know these things, right? And he says that, yes, he says, tell him that Jaffer bin Muhammad says, "Akhruj bima anta fihi wa ana admin lakal jannah." He says to him that get out of whatever you're doing, stop whatever it is that you're doing, and I promise, I guarantee paradise for you. Subhanallah. Yeah. And so Abu Basir goes back to Kufa, or the city he was in, and like, you know, they have a walima when you come back from pilgrimage, and so everybody came, and his neighbor came as well. And his neighbor, he says, "Did you speak to him?" And so he says that wait till the end and I'll tell you what he says. And so he waited, and then when he leaves, and he told him exactly what the Imam said. He says, "Stop what you're doing and I guarantee you paradise." And that's what that person needed. Just that kalam from the Imam, a direct conversation from the Imam, a promise from the Imam, even though God has promised us these things, you know, but sometimes we just need that. And that's what the Imams will provide. And so Abu Basir says that this man on that day stopped doing everything haram. And in fact, he got to that point where he gave away everything that he had earned from haram means. And he says, one day I went to knock on his door and he opened with just, like he was hiding behind the door. And he says, I don't even have any clothes left because I've given away everything that was made of haram. And so Abu Basir says that I began to look after him and provide him clothes and food, whatever. And eventually this guy got sick. And on his deathbed, when he's in his last moments, he looks at Abu Basir and he says that indeed Jaffer bin Muhammad was saying the truth. Subhanallah, yeah? Like he was shown it. And like these type of things, like they have a huge effect on me in the sense that, man, like I know I'm not a bad person, but I need that motivation. I need that extra thing. And the Imam can provide that. And so there's a need that I need to get, that it has to be developed. You know what I mean? And so these 3 points, if we focus on them, like our connection with God, our connection to humanity, and our connection with ourselves and our deficiencies and how to excel that, then the need becomes palpable, the need becomes real, and a need will be. And so that's the second overarching theme, right? The first was belief in his existence. The second is a need. And the third is like a love for the Imam, you know, and this is a overarching theme as well, where like my affinity and affection for him should be real. He's not this mythical character that I've heard about that one day will come, you know what I mean? But it's something that I'm longing for. You know, when you love something, you long for it, right? And so the need should create this love. And so, you know, like some practical things to demonstrate that love, I think, you know, like one way I think is really important is to say, to say salam to the Imam every day, and not like, you know, like oftentimes we recite this ziyarah at the end of our salah. Not that, because I think that's become habitual now, you know. But a carved out time during the day where I actually say salam to him, ask him how he's doing, if he'll give me a chance to meet him, if he needs anything from me, to help me with my work, to help me, inspire me to be a better, just have a conversation with him, right? And I remember, you know, like I'd gone to someone's house, and all of a sudden I was reciting lectures in the city, and I was staying with somebody, and all of a sudden at like 3:13 p.m. all their alarms in the house went off, you know, or at least a couple went off. And I was like, what's happening? And they're like, oh, we set like an alarm so that everyone stops what they're doing and says salam to the Imam of that time, of our time. And I was like, how cool is that? You know what I mean? Like, how cool is that? Like, you get your whole family engaged in it, you know? And so that's something we did in our family. And now, alhamdulillah, you don't even need an alarm. Like, I look at the clock, it's 3:10, I'll remember the Imam. 3:11, I'll remember the Imam. 3:12, I'll remember the Imam. And so it's good. And then you start developing that connection with the Imam more and more, right? So I think that's a really important way of staying connected with the Imam.
Shaykhna, I believe that if we think about it, just as we invest so much into our other relationships with family, with our spouse, with children, right? How much are we investing in that relationship with the Imam of Imam of our time, right? As you said, it starts as something, just having that conversation with him, speaking to him, right? Treating him like he is somebody whom we truly love, and which is inshallah the case. So that's very
Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. You're absolutely right. Like one thing I always say is that like we should like we should create this relationship with the Imam now. You know what I mean? Um, because like we don't want the Imam to be a stranger to us when he comes back. We want to be someone that we've already connected with, you know what I mean? And so like how different of a relationship would that be to have um like somebody you've met just the first time versus somebody you've met multiple times. It's a different way you greet them, it's a different way you connect with them. And so when it comes to the Imam, like we don't want to be strangers with him. And so like to that previous point where the Imam has the ability to say the right thing at the right time, um, but the person on the other hand has to have some light in their heart. You know what I mean? Something good in their heart. If the heart is closed, the Imam, there's no point with the Imam. This is where you look in Karbala, where Imam was speaking to 18,000 people, and only a few handful came to join the Imam. Does that mean that the Imam wasn't effective? No, the people didn't have any light in their hearts. You know what I mean? If they had any light, they would have responded. Hur had light in his heart. Yeah. And so one of the jobs that we have is to ensure that our light is there, and that light, like I was saying, it comes from very simple things. It comes from doing the wajib. Like if you know it's wajib, don't play around with it. Yeah, don't take it lightly. Do it. You may not feel like doing it. Like just there's a hadith where Imam Ali states, that hell is surrounded by unpleasant things. Sorry, heaven is surrounded by unpleasant things. Subhanallah. That means you gotta get through the things you don't like to do to get to Jannah. You know what I mean? And so to get light, do the wajib, avoid the haram. That's it, man. That's what I would tell everyone.
It's not a secret. It's very simple.
Yeah, you're like, we've been told this. So it's like, like sometimes people expect us to give them like new information. It's like, Baba, Islam is not a new religion. It's been given to us. It's just that we're not just ready to submit to it, and so we create obstacles and hurdles, and our own ego comes, our own sense of entitlement comes. And so these are some of the things that we can do to create light in our houses. In our hearts. Another practical thing I think we can do is just keep our homes ready. You know what I mean? There's obviously what that means, nothing haram, nothing questionable in our houses. We don't watch things which are haram. We don't watch things which are questionable. We don't listen to things which are haram. Because you don't want, we all hear this, but this could be true. You have something on and the Imam knocks and you'd be like, oh, let me turn the channel. That's embarrassing, right? That's embarrassing. This is what Imam, I think it's Imam Hassan alayhi salam, or one of our Imams, who talks about why we don't sin. And because he says we're infallible, but doesn't mean we can't sin. But he says we see hell, we see the fire in it. But at the same time, how embarrassing would it be if I die in the process of a sin? You know what I mean? My God, oh, that in itself should prevent us from doing something haram. You know what I mean? That in itself, because you got caught with red-handed, your hand in the cookie jar, and how embarrassing it would be as you left this world, but to meet God in that way.
To meet God
So,
that way. Yeah.
yeah, so keep our homes prepared. I think that's something that's very important. You know, what something my kids did during the COVID Ramadan days when we used to just sit at home and eat at home is they would set like an extra table plate and mat for the imam, and so that would just sit there empty, and so it was kind of cool where you would see that and you would say someone's missing. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
Yeah.
And that plays a big thing, you know, like in our kids' minds, like that's quite effective, you know, and
Inshallah.
so that's, I think, another thing we can do practically.
Inshallah.
Yeah, and so, you know, like there's many things that we can do on a practical level if we have the overarching themes of the knowledge, the need, and the love. Then whatever comes out with it or from that would be authentic, and my display of preparation would then be authentic and personal. And I think that's the way we can personally connect with the Imam of our time.
Inshallah. Inshallah. Thank you, Shaykhna, and inshallah all these 3 steps will help us to prepare for the return of the Imam. And I believe in a way that it's something that we were just been waiting for and something we were looking forward to, and showing that with our hearts, with our words, with our actions, inshallah. Shaykhana al-Aziz, thank you for being here tonight with us and to speak about the Imam of our time, Ajalallahu Faraja. And inshallah, for the sister who contacted, inshallah, the Sheikh will get back to you on that question. Viewers, thank you all for tuning in. See you soon, inshallah. Please keep us in your du'as. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.